Ready? Okay. I'd like to open the Petoskey Planning Commission Wednesday, June 21, 2023 regular meeting in City Hall at 6 p.m. And roll call. Here.
Detmer,
Here.
McSweeney,
Here.
Meridian,
Here.
Newman,
Here.
Paul,
Here.
Roxon,
Here.
Wilma.
Here.
All right. First item is approval of minutes for May 17, 2023 regular meeting. Any comments, corrections? I'll take a motion.
Motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, Ted makes the motion to approve. Charlie makes the second. All in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Everyone approved? All right, moving on to new business. Agenda item 3A in new business, consider a proposed amendment to the sign ordinance that would allow an additional projecting nameplate sign for properties abutting Penn Park between Bay Street and Mitchell Street. John, would you like to
Do. Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. There was a sign permit that had been applied to several months ago from Rough Life Outfitters, and they were requesting the opportunity to put a projecting sign on the back of their building. However, based on the code, only one projecting nameplate sign shall be allowed on each ground floor. And they elected to put a ground projecting sign over on Howard Street. However, when we took a look at it, the commercial area along Penn Park is probably one of the most unique business districts in many small historic towns. It's not a vehicular business district, it's all pedestrian oriented, based on the orientation of the buildings that front out onto the park. But the missing part of it from a signage point of view is all of the signs are wall signs. There's no projecting signs with the exception of the sign that's on the DDA or the downtown offices that says parking services. So as you walk down the street, along the walkway, along the businesses, you really don't know what the name of the businesses are until you look up in front of the business to see what it is. So we are recommending a very minor change to the zoning code that we insert under the projecting nameplate provision, an exception that says properties that abut the west side of Pennsylvania Park between Bay Street and Mitchell Street may have a projecting nameplate sign in addition to other signage allowed under this ordinance. So that would give the business owners along Penn Park the opportunity to have a nameplate sign in addition to the wall sign if they so desire. That's it.
questions from the commission?
I distinctly remember the discussion at the time, projecting nameplates were originally added to the sign ordinance. And I think the thinking at the time was that it was sort of based on a storefront kind of an appearance, that each storefront deserved to have a projecting nameplate. And so in this case, where you have two different storefronts that are on two different streets, I think it only makes sense that the second storefront, because it's remote from the first storefront, be allowed to have a projecting sign as well.
I will add that for the dimensions for a nameplate, the minimum height has to be 7 feet, so somebody walking under it doesn't hit their head. And the maximum height of one is 15 feet on the building. You're allowed 3 square feet. If it's a circle, you're allowed 3.38 square feet. And the sign cannot extend beyond 3 feet 6 inches from the building wall. So those are the rules for a nameplate.
If the planning commission so desires and thinks that this is a reasonable provision, then the proposal would be to schedule a public hearing for the next planning commission meeting to review the ordinance and have a public hearing on it.
I have one question on the language for E. If you look at the article in 1, it says that the each ground floor that fronts a public right of way or alley and one projected shall be allowed one projecting nameplate sign for each below ground floor use that has direct access to a public right of way or alley. Or subject to the following conditions. And I'm wondering if we need to add that to this language that it needs to have a direct access. And maybe all the buildings in that area do have direct access. In other words, there's got to be a door there to qualify for a sign. Is it already stated? Okay, so they specify it for, it looks like. They specify shall be allowed for each below ground use that has direct access to a public right of way or alley. So maybe you don't have to have direct access
Correct.
if it's
That's how I read it.
So it looks like you're covered, you're,
okay.
Yeah.
okay.
All right, that was the only concern I had. So, any other discussion?
I move that we schedule a public hearing to propose this amendment to the sign ordinance.
A second.
Okay, Rick makes the motion, Doug makes the second. All in favor?
Do you want any public comment or not? Or?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's public comment.
Lighting the way this is going.
So state your name and address.
My name is Gary Albert and I own Rough Life Outfitters. And I think this is a positive move, especially within the upcoming improvements to Penn Park and how much more that will gain pedestrian access. So, thank you.
Okay. So I don't think we need to do a roll call. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. 8. All right, now we move on to item 4A in old business. Consider conditions for for the Michigan Maple Block Project 1420 Standish Avenue. And John, would you like to?
Yes, I can walk you through it. The first thing I'd like to go over with the planning commission is the procedure for PUD rezoning designation. And I took the opportunity to put together a flow chart, which I handed out, that's on your desk. There's really, the way that the ordinance is set up, there's really 3 components to a plan unit development project. The first step is the project inception stage, which is a pre-application conference between the applicant and the city staff to review the project in generalities, and then also to go over some of the ordinance provisions and then the procedure that the applicant must go through. The steps 2 through 5 are the actual process to rezone the property. The way that the code is written is that it uses a variety of terms. It refers to it as a PUD rezoning. It refers to it as a PUD plan, as a PUD site plan. But the way that the ordinance is set up, it's along the traditional line of a PUD. The second step is the rezoning petition, which the applicant turns in an application, and the fee and the plans. Step 3 is the preliminary PUD rezoning plan, which this applicant has already presented and the planning commission has already approved. The step 4, which is this evening, is the final PUD rezoning plan, which it states in the ordinance that the planning commission, upon thorough review of the plan and essential supporting documents, shall act to recommend either approval, condition approval, or rejection of the plan. If you recommend approval or approval with condition, then it would move on to the city council, which is step 5. And it's at the council level, like any other zoning ordinance or zoning amendment. The city council has the ultimate decision to rezone the property as a PUD. Now, in some communities, they use the PUD rezoning like you do here in Petoskey. Other communities have a PUD provision which is more or less a development tool, which doesn't require the property to be rezoned. But when the PUD is finally approved by the council, then it's memorialized in a development agreement that's signed by the city and the developer, and it's recorded at the county register of deeds. That's not how yours is set up. It's set up as a rezoning. So step 5 would be city council review and approval. And if they approve it, then the property is then reclassified from its current zoning to PUD. And then step 6 is, once that's done, the developer can proceed, or the applicant can proceed with the preparation of construction plans that would be necessary to get permits from the city. And one of those permits would be a zoning permit. Other permits would be through the engineering and Department of Public Services. And that's the site plan review permit, and that's required for each phase. So in this case, this PUD has 2 phases. The largest phase is the apartment complex. The second phase is the proposed non-residential commercial building on the property, the use yet to be determined. So when that comes online, then the applicant at that time would come back before the planning commission with a site plan, not a rezoning, but a site plan for that piece of property, depending on if it's going to be a restaurant, an office, a drive-in bank, whatever the final use would be, then the planning commission would have an opportunity to review that site plan. So at this point, we are at step 4, which is the final PUD rezoning plan. So the deliberation that the planning commission needs to go through is a review of their plans, which they've submitted a detailed package of their plans, and to determine if the property should be rezoned from its current zoning to PUD, with the idea that the PUD plan calls for the property to be developed as an apartment complex with an outlot for commercial. So that's what's in front of you this evening. We prepared a memo that went through the plans, the sheets. We applied the standards for review. We noted which ones were satisfied, which ones were not or partially satisfied. All of the criteria was satisfied or partially satisfied, and anything that was partially satisfied, we indicated that in the motion to approve with conditions. All right, because this has to go before council yet. It would give the applicant time to make some modifications to the drawings, and then eventually this will cycle back to the PC for a more detailed site plan review. The areas that I pointed out that needed some additional review based on the standards for the final PUD was that the plan should include, this is my opinion, it should include a separate sheet that highlights all areas within the development that are considered common open space. That's a big issue here because there are areas proposed for parks, open space, green areas, playgrounds, outlots, proposed pickleball courts. So the plan should be a plan that just denotes what areas are going to be open for open space for the residents of the development. During one of our construction review meetings, there was this discussion on the width of the sidewalks. In some areas, it looked like it was 7 feet. Proposed plan had listed that the sidewalks were 5 feet. My concern is, and this is obviously subject to planning commission discussion and review. Typically, if you have a 5-foot sidewalk and then you have the sidewalks are used as an integral curb, which means the wheels for the vehicle stop at the curb. There could be an 18-inch to 24-inch overhang over the sidewalk, which reduces the accessible area for ADA or universal design. So if you have a 5-foot sidewalk, you have an 18-inch overhang, which is 1.5 feet, you end up with a 3.5-foot sidewalk. And in a development like this, with the number of people that will be living here, the idea this is set up for families. The sidewalk should have an area larger than 5 feet. We were recommending 6 at a minimum. The plan requirements indicate that on the grading plan, the final contours should be in a dark line weighted with elevations. That's not a big deal. They do have final grades. They just need to apply a darker line between the existing and the final grades to show how the property is going to be graded. It's relatively flat to begin with, but there is some grade. The ordinance requires that on the plan, the surface drainage, the direction of the surface drainage should be indicated with an arrow. So you have an arrow that shows the water from this point is going to meander to this point, to this outlet, and they have a number of different outlets. So that's just that's a graphic denotation on the stormwater plan. There wasn't anything in the narrative that I saw relative to how house waste and recycling is going to be managed. It could be managed internally, or it can be managed externally. And if it's external, there needs to be enclosed dumpsters. Again, this would be something that we would probably talk about during the site plan review, but these were things that I pointed out that the applicant can consider in the meantime. We'd like to have the photometrics and the lighting standards reviewed in more detail so they comply with dark sky standards. We want to make sure that this is appropriate lit, but not overlit, both for the benefit of the people that primarily live on the property, not so much the properties across the street, which are more industrial in nature, but we want to make sure that the lighting is appropriate. And then the last condition is subject to city council approval to rezone. The applicant would come back and submit a site plan or their construction drawings pursuant to the requirements of section 1716, which is the site plan review criteria. And that would be during the site plan review is when we get letters of sign off from the city engineer, the Department of Public Services, Public Safety, and other review boards at the city. That would be part of the site plan review packet that would go to the planning commission so that you have an understanding that the other departments have signed off on water, sanitary sewer, storm, curb cuts, and anything that involves the public infrastructure. So in a nutshell, that's my review, Madam Chairman.
Okay. Ted?
Well, I've got a question. I'm a little confused. We had the agenda memo, which talked about, potential final approval of a PUD. We had a email transmission that said we weren't approving a final site plan tonight, but only talking about the rezoning. You've just talked about a process where we approve things conditionally, and then it goes to city council, and then we'll come back to talk about the site plan.
Correct.
I've got the PUD ordinance in front of me. And review of a final PUD's rezoning site plan for a decision, the planning commission, upon a thorough review of the final PUD rezoning site plan and all essential supporting documentation shall act to recommend approval, conditional approval, or rejection based on findings, and then send it to city council.
Correct.
So there's no part in this ordinance about, it's talking about final site plan approval.
No, you have to read down to almost the last part of the PUD where it says, subject to city council approval, the applicant shall then prepare construction drawings and submit same to the city for their permits. And one of the permits is a zoning permit, which requires site plan approval. The problem with the way that the ordinance was constructed, it's extremely convoluted because it interchanges terms. In some cases, it says rezoning, sometimes it says rezoning plan, and then it says rezoning site plan. But the last step in the overall process is that they would submit final construction drawings for the city to review prior to the issuance of permits, and that's the site plan review process.
I'm respectfully going to disagree. That's not what this says.
No, take a look at the very last.
I am with the approval of the final plan. With the approved final plan and the planned unit development district designation, the applicant may proceed with the preparation of construction plans.
Correct.
As provided for in the ordinance, and may subsequently seek any other necessarily permits for construction.
Right.
It's all approved.
A permit for construction is, they're not going to be able to construct unless Ms. Denoyer issues them a zoning permit. She's not going to issue a zoning permit until they have an approved site plan.
Respectfully disagree. Review of a final PUD rezoning site plan for decision.
This is a final PUD rezoning site plan. This is it right here. You're not going to be able to build this project off of this drawing.
In this regard, you may or may not realize that I don't know if that's gonna work. That in the preliminary PUD approval, there was information not there. We did a conditional approval. And one of them was the facade, the actual visual character, which is a standard, which actually is more detailed in the preliminary PUD standards for approval. And that is specific in the final because you've already done it, but we haven't done it. In fact, we've got it for the first time tonight. So you're telling me that we could approve this tonight with some of these conditions, send it to city council, say, hey, go ahead with it. They would approve it, they would rezone it, and then they'd come back there and say, hey, we don't like this facade, we don't like this on the site. It doesn't, that's not the process I've seen in the city before.
No, let's recycle back to a meeting or two ago, which I wasn't part of because I recused myself, but you reviewed at 2 meetings a facade elevations for the project over on Emmett Street.
Because they changed them.
Correct. But that review was subject to, that review was based on the fact that they submitted the elevations as part of their site plan submission. Which you're gonna see the elevations as part of the site plan submission.
I've never seen this process, and I've been through the PUD process where the facade and all this is not discussed like we do any other site plan review. Where we would just say, no, on this one, we kind of got these tonight for the first time. Whatever, we'll send it and they'll have to come back to us.
Well, the purpose of the way the process is set up is you don't get into the details until you get through the rezoning. I mean, take a look at it from the developer's point of view. A PUD process is either a development agreement or it's a process to rezone property, which then once that's done, then the applicant or the developer then dives into more of the details and spends their money on the construction drawings, which are usually subject to site plan approval. Why would a community tell a developer, you've got to prepare your full set of construction drawings before we're going to give you a approval for a rezoning?
Why you would do that is because this zoning district, unlike every other zoning district, has no setbacks, no definitions. The project is the rezoning. So unlike R1, R2, if we change the zoning in the city, we know what we're doing. We know what the setbacks, the heights are, parking, on and on and on. This is different. This has no rules. It's what we approve.
You're approving the rezoning of the property to PUD.
To a specific PUD.
Based on the fact that you're going to have an apartment complex and an outlot for commercial. You're approving, you should be approving the PUD rezoning based on the character and based on the type of uses that they're going to put on the property. You flesh the details out in the site plan review, just like you normally do.
So the question is, if there's significant disagreement with elements, those can involve cost.
Yes.
So again, you've still got a thing where developers going down a trail, oh, I'm approved, oh, I'm not.
Well, it's not uncommon when an applicant submits for a site plan that the planning commission may tell them to go back and redesign either the elevations or portion of the project based on their review. You never really, I mean, one of the fundamentals of the planning commission rezoning a property is you never rezone a property contingent upon a site plan. You rezone a property based on what the land use is going to be, because you don't know in the future what that property is going to be used for. So if I came in and said, I want to rezone this property because I'm going to put up, let's pick a use, I'm going to put in a Whole Foods grocery store. And the planning commission gets excited and says, wow, we really like a Whole Foods here. We're going to rezone this to commercial. And then as a developer, I get a better deal. Somebody comes in and says, I want to build 5 different commercial buildings. I don't want to build a Whole Foods. Well, I've already got the property rezoned, so I can build anything in that zoning district that's allowed into the ordinance.
See, but that's not what a PUD is. We're specifically approving not a zoning district with certain overlays. These uses are allowed. Oh, I'm going to put a grocery store there. I'm not even listening to that. And those
You're
approving this plan.
You're approved. Yep, that's correct. In the
If they
plan,
want to change it, there's major and minor revisions, and there's a process for that. It's a big deal.
it is a
You
big
can't just change.
subject to they still have to submit a site plan where you have to review the site plan. The way that The ordinance has standards for review, which are very general compared to your site plan review package. So I'm not gonna allow you to approve the site plan based on the criteria that they have for review standards for the PUD, because some of these standards don't even come close to addressing what should be included in a site plan proposal to the planning commission.
So you're saying we're approving general use of the property with buildings and certain kind of, this is the general plan,
Correct.
not the facades, not the.
I mean, they're showing you what they think the facades are gonna look like as part of their submission, which is appropriate. A lot of developers do. They're showing you their.
Well, it was required, it was required in the preliminary, the visual character. I mean, could it be more clear?
Yeah, Commissioner Paul, I wasn't here for the preliminary review. So if they did not submit that as part of the preliminary review package, I don't have any, knowledge of that. I just reviewing what the submission was that they gave us about 10 days ago. And it's very concise. I thought their submission was comprehensive in terms of what the character is, what they want to do, how they want to design it, where they want the parking lots, where they're going to have green space, and how they're going to handle the on-site utilities. But it is not an official site plan that normally the city would review and basically issue a zoning permit off of at this point in time. So.
You know, I'll just from your submission, under K, building height, bulk and character. With regards to building height, bulk and character, the final Maple Black Flats PUD plan remains identical to the intent and design of the conceptual plan approved through the preliminary PUD. That reads nice and it sounds like we've done our due diligence, but the fact is we had no design. We had no facade in the preliminary PUD. So you can gloss over this statement here, but the truth is it wasn't there.
Well, we have it now.
We have it now.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's not. Like we wouldn't discuss that in depth.
You can discuss it as part of this review to give the developer or the developer's professionals what your opinions are on the facade, but the elevations are going to show back up on the final site plan. Because that's what's going to get reviewed, and then any minor or major amendments to the PUD are going to come after they submit that plan if they have to make modifications to that site plan. That's how I interpret the way that your ordinance is set up. And many ordinances, let me assure you, many PUDs they get the PUD approved, and then the next step is the detailed site plans and construction drawings they come back with.
And what I'm having problem with is this statement about what we're to do tonight from the ordinance, which is review or final PUD rezoning site plan for decision. And then it goes to this meeting,
The key is the word rezone.
rezoning site plan.
Yeah, and
But you're saying this isn't a site plan.
no, it's not a site plan.
Why does that ordinance say we have?
Well, if you take a look at, if you read through the entire ordinance, sometimes it omits the word rezoning. And sometimes it says, it just says rezoning plan, and then in some cases it says rezoning site plan.
Yeah,
But the bottom line is you're basing the decision to recommend approval or not approval of the PUD based on the conceptual drawings that have been presented and the preliminary information that the developer has put in his application packet. So,
okay.
and I get where you're going, because I had to read the ordinance a couple of times myself. And I can assure you that when you rewrite the ordinance later on this year or the beginning of next, that ordinance is not going to appear. It's going to be a completely different process.
I will just throw out there for you that I was here for the Petoskey Point PUD. And it, for better or worse, was handled entirely differently. It was an absolute site plan review, just like we do for anything else before they approved it.
Did you ever get a site plan after that fact?
No,
You never did.
it was, well, it never went.
Oh, it never went through all the way.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I don't know what.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, it seems to me that a couple of important points are for the future. We need to rewrite this ordinance to make it clearer what the process is and to simplify the process so that all parties have a bite at the apple at the appropriate time. The second thing is, with regard to the confusion, I understand Commissioner Paul's issues. On the other hand, the fact that it's going to come back to us for a further site review, I think we get another bite at the apple for the comprehensive review that he's looking for tonight. And I think that the developers would very much appreciate any major concerns that he has with regard to the package and his review of the package for the future benefit of their development of the final package for site review at that time. So I don't see any limitation or concern about following the path that the planner has recommended to us tonight. And I recommend that we do that expeditiously.
Okay, so the path is tonight we would approve the PUD zoning with this map or whatever you want to call it.
And recommend or offer to the developer any highlighted concerns that you have as a result of the review of the comprehensive package here.
Yes.
But it's no wonder that their initial cover is a little confusing because it's confusing.
Mhm.
And we need to get that straightened out for the future.
Yes. All right. Any other questions from the commission for the city planner? Okay.
I have another point in terms of the conditions. And this may be dealt with by Department of Public Works. I'm sure it has been. But in addition to the map changes that you're recommending for the stormwater, given the nature of its location, the sensitivity of its location, I found that the package didn't have enough detail in it in terms of the number of gallons, depending on the rate of rainfall and so forth. I didn't have enough information to understand how these two little units are going to handle the stormwater accordingly. At least I only saw 2 units on the ground plan. So they could be magnificent units, but there wasn't enough detail for me to understand what the strengths and weaknesses of this plan were.
Those are the type of comments that we should be providing to the developer and the developer's engineer and designer. Because it's just giving them a heads up on what could be anticipated.
That's why I made the comment.
Yeah, for the site. And I will say that the professionals that have been working on this for the developer have been very responsive to city staff comments and observations. And I think they've done a pretty good job as of this point of really trying to solve some of the questions that the city staff have presented to them. But I know that as part of this process, because it is a large project, that they need to hear from you based on your review of the packet, which includes the elevations. They did a pretty good job of laying out the elevations. Things that, as a planning commission, the concerns that you may have or observations that they need to take back and they need to incorporate into their final submission if the council rezones the property to a PUD.
So that was my number 1 question and concern for their benefit. My number 2 question, there's been no discussion of making this a gated community, and I want to make sure that that doesn't come back in the final site plan.
All right, are there any other more questions for the city planner? I would like to invite the applicants, Jeff Smoke, Wayne Seeger, and Chris Wickline. Stand at the podium, state your name and the light has to be green, so there you go.
Chris Wickline, JB Donaldson, we're the developer and partner with Jeff Smoke, who's the main guy here. So I don't know if we can hear Jeff, but
good evening and thank you for your time. Appreciate the opportunity tonight to share our final PUD presentation. I'm Jeff Smoke with Great Lakes Capital, and as Chris just mentioned, he's our designer and contractor. Also on the team is Wayne Seeger. He's our civil engineer with Mansfield Land Use Consultants. And also we have Mac McClellan. He is our environmental and brownfield consultant on the project, also in the crowd tonight. So happy to get this started. I'll keep my intro very brief. I think you all have been apprised of this site for a little while now. I can just cover a couple quick highlights. It is a priority redevelopment site by the city of Petoskey. we are proposing a 204 unit workforce / market rate housing development. As you all are aware, or soon will be aware, there's extensive demolition and environmental cleanup here at this site. If all goes well with approvals and we get all the incentives we need, we plan to start demolition in the fall of 2023, so 4 or 5 months from now. The first buildings would be consequently 11 to 12 months after we break ground for the initial phase of buildings. And I'll let Wayne or Chris take it from here.
Additional visual, right?
Again, I'm Wayne Seeley with Mansfield Land Use. We're based out of Traverse City in Charlevoix. Yeah, tonight, as John had indicated, we're looking for a final PUD rezoning approval to go on to City Council. The site plan, this is a number of times you've seen this now in various evolution. Been spending a lot of time with the staff, as John had also indicated. I just essentially want to go through the items listed on his report and identify our reaction to that, and then after that, Chris is going to talk about the buildings. So the first one, the common open space exhibit, no problem. That is very easy for us to do, and that is something we'll gladly provide. Sidewalks are actually 7 feet for the majority of them adjacent to the buildings. I know it's hard to scale on those little drawings, but they are. Anywhere there's a parking place abutting a sidewalk, it is 7 feet. The areas like say along the river or where it's going to go out and connect into Standish Avenue, those are 5 feet. But anywhere parking 7. The plan, yeah, we can keep up those lines without a problem. And the drainage arrows, unfortunately, was a bad layering issue. When we hit the print button, there was a layer not turned down for that print set. So we actually have drainage arrows sitting on our hard drives, but unfortunately not in your packet. It is, as John indicated, it's a pretty flat site. So it's not really that challenging of a grading plan or so. And then Chris is going to talk a little bit on the waste handling when he is talking about the architecture and the buildings. And photometrics, we do have a full plan that has been run through, so we can provide, staff has asked for a digital version of that so they can run it through their analysis to make sure that doesn't exceed any of the levels that they were. As far as stormwater treatment, without getting into too much of that right now, there's challenges out there with the environmental that are causing us to do some different types of managing of the stormwater. The units that we are proposing will get more detail with you on that when we get into the stormwater site plan area. We are anticipating a permit being required from Eagle through the joint process with the Corps of Engineers. That permit will be for inland lakes and streams, wetlands, and floodplain. We requested a pre-application meeting with them. Once we get on that schedule, they're going to bring the whole troop of them down here to take a look at the site, and we're going to work through at the state level the things that they want to incorporate, and then also I would believe that the DPW director or your engineer would also be joining us for that meeting as well, so we can collaborate. The state wants certain things, the city wants certain things, and the site needs certain things, and so that's when we'll hopefully have a much better detail, we should say, approach to that. And then the community skills coming Chris could talk a little bit on that too, if you have more questions on that, but. So with that, Chris is going to speak on the architecture and then we can take any questions that you may have after that.
Thank you.
On the recycling and refuge, so we will have it's shown at the north end of the property, they will have a compactor. And then also a recycling center that regardless of its internal or external, we would have those and we both expect to put those in enclosures. The architecture is conceptual in nature, that's based on a couple of meetings we had with the city. And we're looking for your feedback on those elevations and we added some color to them, but we are looking for that feedback to detail those the building footprints and layouts work with the number of parking and the expectations for the site. So we like those, but the elevations and stuff, if you have anything that you're looking for, you can let us know.
All right. Does the planning commission have questions for the developer? Ted?
I had a question. Previously, it was some time ago, there was some discussion about the soil, these are contamination, and I thought there was a statement that they didn't find much, but I know more work was ongoing. You said tonight that there was challenges with environmental. Can you say any more?
Mac is here, he can, so I'll let him speak to that.
Okay.
Matt McCullough with Mac Consulting Services, also in partnership with you did a good deal of investigation. Did 2 rounds of investigation and actually found pretty widespread fill. I have a map that kind of shows those as well. I'm happy to pass out if you
Define fill, what you mean?
Yeah, well, the site was filled, fairly much across the site. In that fill, there were metal contaminants, basically, which is common in fill. So really across the site, there are also some locations, at least some volatile organic compounds, likely from the operations itself. So we have a number of issues to address almost across the site. If it's okay, I'm happy to.
I'll pass it down.
I'm happy to talk ad nauseum about any of these items if you like, but as you can see, there's fairly widespread contamination across the side. Much of the material, the west side is more of a challenge and more detailed, but again, we have metals across the site that have to be addressed. I just want to say I've worked on over 80 projects, brownfield projects. This is the one that ticks off all of the boxes. Large building with lots of asbestos and demolition, large demolition, widespread contamination, above vapor intrusion screening criteria. So there might be a need to put in vapor mitigation systems across the site. Any fill that comes up, any materials that comes off the site has to be landfilled. And as well, the geotechnical challenges for the site as well. So it kind of ticks all of the brownfield boxes. They're unfortunately with a lot of challenges. I will say that we've been successful in securing a $1 million Eagle grant and $1 million Eagle loan through the city of Petoskey, going through the final process for that. So that's an important factor, a critical factor for us to address the environmental issues in the site.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the developer? All right, well, I'll take that.
I've just
Oh,
got
go ahead, Rick.
comments on refuge and recycling. I mean, I guess at some point along the way, I'm really hopeful that we'll have a lot more detail about how that's all going to be handled. You said compactors.
Yeah.
I assume that will be sized, or those would be sized for 200 units, and the number of people that were involved.
Yeah.
Or will be involved in living there. And the recycling, I mean, that number of people will generate a lot of refuge and hopefully a lot of recycling. And so I just want to make sure that you all are anticipating, what needs to be done to deal with all of that. And, that there's adequate capacity to receive it. I'm really stuck on this issue because I lived in Bear Creek Meadows Apartments for a
Yeah.
couple of years. And, people are pigs. I cannot state it more directly, So anything you can do to make sure that end of your process is well handled, I think is going to be important. I did notice on the utility plan that where the water services were shown to each of the buildings, that there is not a water service shown to the maintenance building. And I don't know if that's where the refuge and recycling will take place, but wherever that function does take place, it seems to me you're going to want to have some kind of water service there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To make sure that is taken care of. So I guess that's my major.
Yeah, we size, we work with the local, I think GFL would probably be the one that's up here, but we work with them to lease the compactor. And, I think we've built near 35 communities and we work with our property management team and, we size those to, what's been used in those developments. We just recently built 2 in Traverse City that are a little bit larger than this. And we'd be using that same methodology, which has worked out pretty well.
And so you feel that the location up there by the maintenance garage, is that where this kind of function would take place?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's an adequate amount of space allocated to that function.
Yeah, we would use a 20-yard recycling container and then a 40-yard compactor, which would be picked up once a week.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. And the only other comment that I had is the separation between kind of phase 1 and phase 2. Now that all the residential parking is spread out outside the footprint of the buildings, it does consume a lot of site area. And I see with the refinement of the commercial building there in the northeast corner that the 2 parking lots come quite close to each other. And there is a narrow green belt between the 2 portions of the parking, but I just want to note that I think it's important to try to differentiate those well enough that, somebody comes home to their apartment and they don't find that there's somebody, in the commercial area that's parking on the wrong side of the green space there. And they have trouble, finding a spot for themselves outside their apartment. So I don't know if that would be an issue at all, but I just want to raise that as a concern that I had.
Yeah, in our previous plans, they were more common, and we put that in there to add a little bit more separation to prevent that. So I agree with what you're saying.
Thank you.
All right. Doug?
Thank you. I'm not sure who's the most appropriate person to speak to this, but I know when we had discussed some of the rationale for creating a PUD for this particular project, it was in particular solving a part of our housing problem, that so-called missing middle.
Yep.
Can you give any more information in terms of where you believe rents and will be coming in for it with this project?
I can I know the information, but I'm going to let Jeff say it.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. The missing middle is defined by the MEDC and MISTA as pricing between 80 to 120% AMI. So that's kind of the range that we're targeting here. From an actual dollar and dollars and cents, 1,000 square foot apartment would be roughly $1,750 in that range. So that puts things into perspective. That's kind of the middle of that 80 to 120 range. And so this project needs several incentives to be able to financially pencil. And so we will be targeting, a good percentage of the units. I can't give you an exact amount now, but somewhere in that, 40 to 80% of the units would be allocated for that quote unquote missing middle.
I'm sorry, was that 40 to 80%?
Yeah, 40 to 80% would be targeted towards that missing middle. It just depends. You know, practically all of the units will be priced in the missing middle range, but when you commit to an incentive program and then you have to turn away people that make above or below that, then you put your property in jeopardy. So you can't really commit to 100%, especially in a more of a rural area like Petoskey, because then you're actually turning away. You know, we reached out to the college and they have a lot of staff that make more, you know, than the 80 to 120 that still can't find housing. So if we were to commit to 100% of those missing middle, then we're actually still turning away. So really what the MEDC wants is income diversity. And so there would be a good portion, you know, of these units that we'd officially allocate 80 to 120, but practically the rents are all going to be the same, if that makes sense.
And if I understand that correctly, so is it safe to say that the lowest rental, the estimate on the lowest rental price for the smaller units is that 1750 number?
No, that was based on 1,000 square foot unit. So if there was a 500 square foot unit, it would be a little more than it'd probably be 60% of that. So it'd be, as you go smaller, you know, the rate goes up slightly, but the overall, your overall rent is much less, right? So a 600 square foot unit, you know, might be $1.90 a square foot or $1.95 a square foot, right? And so that would be closer to, you know, $1,100.
Okay, thank you. Back in March, and I guess this is a two-part question here. Back in March was talked about pocket parks in between the buildings, and the original design had parking in the first floor. When seeing the design in front of us, it seems like there's much less green space, I guess, than what I was conceptualizing. And obviously that has to do with the fact that parking is no longer underneath the buildings. But I also don't really see a whole lot of detail around, you know, pocket parks. I'm not sure I really know what that is, but maybe if you could speak to some of the green spaces.
I can just speak real quick just to the underground or at grade parking that, you know, tuck under parking. Got a couple different names. So we spent, you know, 3 or 4 months trying to make that type of structure work. And, you know, as you get into the details, you can do a lot of these, like Chris has done a bunch of these communities and we've done several as well. The price, you know, the price just doesn't make sense. You just cannot make, this project is already extremely challenging to make it work. And so we had to eliminate that. I wish we could have done, you know, the tuck under parking, because then it does allow more space and more green space. I still feel like we have as much as we can, especially kind of accentuating the river. I'm happy to let Wayne or Chris talk in more detail, but yeah, we spent several months trying to make the tuck under parking work, and then it's just not financially feasible.
Just go part one, 4 different readings of the answer, because each of the professionals here could come at it from different directions. So I want to speak on the site plan in the sense of the issue with the way the parking count has to be met based on the number of units, which is something is in the ordinance where we want that too, because we want to be able to have good parking for the tenants. That then, you know, in keeping from getting too close to the river, we're pretty close. Just it became a raw space issue where the layout of the buildings to be able to sit nicely with each other, then in the parking in the lanes, just was just quite simple space issue. I say that the others, Mac and Crystal both talk on this. Mac has a lot to say about the environmental conditions and the geotechnical for the underground proposal that prohibited that. And then if you want Chris to speak more on the buildings, they certainly could, but essentially, you know, it became about a cost, space, and you got to make everything fit.
Yeah, I don't think we need any more on the why you can't do the underground parking. I think that was understood at the time you explained it before.
On I'm not sure what you mean by the mini parks or that or what that full detail is, but if you see where we've got the small triangles in between the buildings and there's a walking trail along the river. So those are areas that we would likely put like pavilions and grill out areas for the residents. We just don't have those on here yet. But there'd likely be 2 or 3 of those along that walking path. And they have the amenity area at the north end and then, the community building pool area as well to give residents different places to go.
Anyone else with questions for the developer? We'll bring it back and we'll have, review it and have our comments then. But if you have specific questions for the developer now. Okay, normally at this time I would open it up for public comment. So do you have any desire? I just want to add for the record that David Trout sent a packet with suggestions for taking advantage of the Riverview. And I think, did everyone receive this? Okay. All right. So did anybody have any comments about it? Okay, so. Thank you, David Trout, for taking the time. What is it? Troutman, sorry. Thank you, David Troutman. All right, we'll bring it back to commissioner discussion and I don't know if you want to go through. I know that the building facade is an issue. Do you want to tackle that first? How do you want to do this?
Well, it's my understanding we could make comments, but that wasn't the focus of tonight.
Well, I think since this is the first time we're seeing the facade, if anyone wants to give them feedback about what they'd rather see, this would be a good time to do it.
I'm happy to go. I was fairly disappointed in what I saw. I'm not an architect and we do have one here. I have lived in town for 30 years, kind of an old house guy, but I just, on what I see facing me, side elevation, that I see every kind of vertical, horizontal, brick, wood. I don't get a sense that there's anything like this looks like in Petoskey. It's just a mixture of elements often broken mid-wall. I don't know if we can put any. We had that up. If you could put up that. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. So, my comments would be, I'm used to seeing more of a, either a consistent look across the building with certain features, or sometimes a bigger building will be broken into sections that differ, but this seems to have different pieces mid-wall. The vertical components are kind of unusual from my eye for something that's a residential structure.
Yeah, and this is based off of the feedback where we were asked to do something a little outside of traditional. So a lot of the stuff we do is the traditional stuff that you would see, and this is so any feedback that if you'd like to see it go back in a more traditional apartment style building, or even more modern, or this is kind of in between that. So
Rick, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I guess I see the way the building is broken up as a way to take a large building, which is a long building, a 3-story tall building, to try to break it into smaller units. And so the way the roof goes up and down along the length of the building, the way the building projects outward, projects out from each side, breaks it into units, and then the large 3-story facade areas are broken by the use of different materials, and maybe the way it's rendered, the colors are maybe what's sticking with you, Ted. I don't know, but
Partially,
I think the fact that there's vertical board and batten siding, which are what are called the yellow areas. And then there's horizontal lap siding, which are the kind of brown areas. And then, as I understand it, the bases of the vertical elements would be a stone veneer. And I do like the idea of the different materials breaking up the large scale of the buildings. So I think that's a plus in my mind.
Let me just, so this is the kind of thing that vertical and horizontal that on one face that it bothers me.
Well, just as a comment, the artist tried to do some shading.
Yeah, the shading is more for, oh, sorry.
And unfortunately, the sun is not in the same position for each of the elevations, which makes it look a little bit more confusing than it actually is. For a full scale rendering, you obviously want to have shading and trees and stuff like that, but for this purpose, for clarity, probably should have not had shading in it because it would have made the combination of materials and sidings look a little simpler.
Yeah, the color, the shading that's done is really just to represent different materials, not the color. And you know, I agree, the shading does make it look a little confusing.
Rick, are you done weighing in? Carolyn, I'd like you to weigh in.
Sure. I agree with Rick. I appreciate the change in the volume on the facade, and I appreciate the change in materials as well. I wouldn't want to see one material on the whole facade and a flat facade. This looks like there's, you know, there's thought put into it. You know, when we drive down to where this is, we're in this weird zone where we're going from residential down into commercial, but we have the river, we have the natural landscape. I feel like this is going to fit in, and this is a great, you know, first pass at a place that someone's going to call home here in Petoskey. So I like where it's going. I appreciate it.
Rich?
I would agree with Carolyn and Rick. I think it's a rather attractive design. It's interesting, and like someone mentioned, they took some thought. And breaking up was often large blocky buildings. Yeah, I'm pleased, and I'd like to see it move forward. Thank you.
Doug, do you have any comments?
This is from an entirely non-architecture, background. I feel when I look at this design, I feel like I've seen it a lot frequently. In terms of, you know, I could travel to Traverse City and the mixed use of materials. And my only comment or concern is I just wonder how it's going to age. And, you know, 10, 15 years ago, does it really kind of date the property to a certain time period? And so I guess I would just kind of encourage, as you're thinking about, you know, I like the different directions of the materials and the different materials to break up such a large space, but I just wonder if there's any thought that can be done in terms of, you know, choosing materials that you think are going to age and not necessarily date, you know, that property for this decade when someone looks at this 15 years from now.
And I think the materials and color that we use will not. I mean, we're using you know, high-end materials that you'll see on, you know, $1 million homes up here. So the exterior materials in general will age pretty well. On the design, you know, it is something that this design is something that's fairly new. I don't know if that would, you know, in the future would classify it in a, you know, a time period of when it was built. But you know, you could also, if stuff gets more unique, you know, building something that's more traditional now, you kind of age yourself immediately. So, you know, I think we're up for either one. We tried to compromise and do not something that's not wildly unique, but kind of give it a little bit of character and kind of take away from a traditional apartment community that is near some industrial and give it a little bit of an edge. So that's what we're looking to do.
Matt, did you have any comment?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Carol, and I think this is a good first pass at it.
I think it's gonna fit nicely with where it's being developed, and just as we move further along the process, we can discuss and talk about what it's gonna look like in greater detail, but yeah,
Yeah, I think, we have yet to bring the designer in. This is really the architectural first pass. So we'll, a designer will come in and, put a nice touch on it. For sure.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Does anybody have any comments about apartment layouts? All right, and then there is the overall development perspective. Does the commission want to see anything different? Is this adequate? Any comments about this?
Are we talking about just the overall site plan layout that we're looking at right now?
Well, I'm looking at the back of it that is supposed to show the height and the impact it has on the area of buildings. So does anybody want to see any other kind of images going forward? Maybe at a pedestrian view of.
Ted?
I think to comment on what you're talking about, we have a series of renderings.
Yeah.
Which I assume were to fulfill. In the preliminary PUD that at various points around it, you would have a graphic illustration of the visual impacts.
Yeah.
Of adequate, accurate size, scale and dimension. And so it's hard to tell where these are, but almost assuredly, these are what I always see, which is a wide angle view to get the whole building. And yet if you stood at this spot 30 feet away, 37 feet, it's not out there, it's up there. So I don't feel like I get a sense of scale, accurate scale. The dimensions are accurate, it's just the view is that kind of wide angle.
Gotcha.
Distant view, and you can see some. Again, it's hard to tell where you are, how close you are to these buildings, but if you're at the road, you're probably within 30 feet of them. And if you look sideways at 37, whatever the roof is up there, 30 feet away is not kind of out there, it's up there, it's up.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, a bit lacking.
So would we like to request views from a pedestrian?
I would like to see that.
Okay.
And I would like to see it where we're taking a real photograph. It could be from Clarion or down by the old football field, looking at the property, with the actual
Its current
photograph,
state.
and then with a rendering dropped into it, so we can see a better perspective of the natural landscape with the building in it. Because that just looks like a rolled over flat land area in those renderings, so.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful.
Okay, is there? I think that's probably the most important stuff that we want to look through in terms of this booklet. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to comment on in the packet? Okay, moving on. They provided this layout of the buildings. We want to get feedback on this layout.
I understand the layout and the sort of the grid format based on the parking and the buildings. I'm just really curious of the hierarchy of units with the view of the river and how that goes down when you go to renting them and pricing them. And if there are certain buildings that are more have more interest than others, like is there going to be I don't know the impact of that. I would like to see all of them with the water view. Some of them are looking directly across at another unit. It's a big lot, so I'm just would rather see more units with better views, I guess.
Yeah, and the layout really kind of gives the most common area to the riverside near the walking trail. And I think where in this development you've got
because the building design, right, you generally have one type of building in the back and another type in the front. And I think the site layout allows some of the people that might desire a unit that's in the front of the building, a little peek at the river, and not just people at the back of the building, and the unit mixes.
I would say that in terms of the river and the impact the view has on someone recreating on the river, that the way they have these angled, I think there's enough green space to break it up that, you still feel like you're in a nice area. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I think a question that came up when we were looking at this site plan in the past, when you brought it to us, was, is there any pedestrian access to the riverfront? Are there spots where, kids could go swimming or fishing or get in an inner tube?
So, and I'll make the comment generally on the unit, if a unit faces the water, we have a community in Traverse City that has views of the bay. And your price is generally based on the unit type and, where the unit's located, where if a unit becomes available, somebody will move in the development to get that unit. But generally, you don't see a lot of price differences based on location. It's really just where those units are rented faster.
Okay.
In general, the walking trail, we do have a walking trail that is along the river. At this time, we don't have any amenities going down the river just because of the environmental concerns. Because right now that site is actually dumping into the, I think it has, Wayne could clarify, but maybe 4 or 5 outlets into the river. So as of right now, we're not going to be putting any amenities to the river. So it would just be the view and the green space, kind of separating the residents, from traffic by their apartment, and then green space to the river.
And also just to cross the bridge, they could access the public park we have and they have amenities for canoeing, kayaking. So
But again, I would make the point, this isn't a lazy river. This is set up for whitewater and
Mhm,
potentially somewhat dangerous
mhm.
if you don't know what you're doing.
Right, so for reliability, just
Right.
probably.
If you just jump in an inner tube and
tackle
you're a
it.
kid, be surprised.
All right, is there any other factors that we should consider?
So if I could just, I'll just kind of say too, just as a comment, I noticed on the 2 buildings that are next to the clubhouse and the setbacks on those, that's 25 feet. When I know it's not apples to apples comparison, but when I think about an RM2 zone, the setback is 30 feet. The 2 that are next to the pool.
It says kind of the shape of a C. That's the pools in the middle, and then you've got 3 red buildings surrounding it.
And so I'm assuming there's a trade, in terms of the size of those buildings and the number of units and just making the project more viable. So, but I did want to just give a comment of, I'm not sure if there's a material difference between 25 feet and 30 feet of what we would typically see in a multifamily. But I think if we got closer than 25 feet, then I guess I'd be a little bit more, probably a little bit more concerned. And so I hate to see that get any closer to the street.
Yeah, our unit layouts and everything like that, we've looked at those pretty extensively. So and we like the layouts with, everyone can have a queen size bed and 2-bedroom. We don't have any smaller bedrooms. So I think the buildings in that proximity would stay where it's at, but I can let Wayne.
Okay.
I did want to add though that in John and Lisa couldn't validate, but I believe the RM2 is 25 feet for a front yard setback. Does that sound right? Sorry for but we did check that because we didn't want to wanted to kind of stay within the. But I guess if you could validate that for me.
Is that what that is, 25 feet on those buildings?
Yeah, the front one and for the front yard, yeah, just on those 2.
2 ends of a building. I'm looking at the time, so I think I'd like to end the discussion and
It's 25.
say it again.
25 feet.
Okay. So unless there's anything else the commission wants to bring up, I would entertain a motion.
I move that based on the documentation submitted by the applicant, the public record, and the recognition that the subject property is identified as a priority redevelopment site, in the Livable Petoskey Master Plan. I make a motion to recommend approval of the PUD case number 1-23 to rezone the property at 1420 Standish Avenue, property identification number 521907200012 to PUD to accommodate a residential apartment complex with a commercial outlot pursuant to Article 25 of the City of Petoskey zoning ordinance for the Petoskey City Council with the following conditions. Do I need to read them or can we just number one? The plan should include a separate sheet that highlights all areas within the development that are considered common open space. Number two, increase sidewalk width to at least 6 feet to accommodate vehicle overhang and ADA accessibility. Number three, indicate on grading plan the final contours in a dark line weight and elevations. Number four, the plan direction of surface drainage should be noted on the plan with arrows indicating the flow direction. Number five, indicate how house waste and recycling will be managed and if the site needs enclosed dumpsters. Number six, reserve approval of the photometric plan to verify photometric and lighting standards relative to dark sky standards. And number seven, subject to the city council approval to rezone the property as a PUD, the applicant shall submit a site plan pursuant to the requirements of section 1716.
Okay. Discussion? I have a question.
Well, you need a second.
Oh, sorry.
Second.
Okay, Charlie made the motion and Matt made the second. I have a question about your comment that if the sidewalks, if there's no parking, then the sidewalks are 5 feet. And I wanted to confirm that what is this city's normal sidewalk, standard sidewalk? Now. Lisa, do you know? Sorry, it's only 4 feet?
No, I'm asking for, you're talking for,
What they said is they're allowing 7 feet of sidewalk where there's a parking spot. But where there are no parking spots, they're reducing it to 5 feet. So I was wondering if that was the city's standard or also is that ADA compliant? Okay, all right. Any other discussion, questions? Comments? All right, roll call vote.
Buck.
Favor.
Detmer? Yes. McSweeney?
Yes.
Meridian?
Yes.
Newman?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Robson?
Yes.
Wilmot?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. All right. Moving along. Is the agenda item 4B an old business public hearing on a short-term rental ordinance? And John, would you like to introduce that?
Yes, Madam Chairman, members of the commission. Based on the review and discussion at the last meeting, Lisa and I and Matt Cross, the city attorney, got together to discuss the ordinance. That's before you regarding the short-term rental. And this is the ordinance that would amend the zoning code to specify what zoning districts short-term rentals would go in the city, and those are listed in the ordinance, and they're all the business districts. During our review, we noted that the city zoning code in several cases refers to hotel and motel as a permitted use in some of the district. One of the districts where it's permitted is the B2 Central Business District. However, there was no definition in the ordinance for what a motel is. So we took the opportunity as part of the ordinance to revise the definition of a hotel. Basically to insert that a hotel is a public lodging on a transient basis in which access to and from each room or unit is through an interior door.
An exterior door.
No, interior for a hotel.
For a hotel, sorry.
We inserted a new definition for motel, which says that it is basically access is provided to each room through a exterior door, which is typically a motel. So it's the mode of access, the type of access determines if it's a hotel or a motel. So we put a new definition in for motel. And the reason for taking a look at the hotel motel was because of our conversation regarding the short-term rental, which is permitted currently over on Wakazoo, which has 4 units that all have exterior doors. And Lisa had pointed out, I think at the meeting, that hotel motel is allowed as a permitted use in the central business district. However, we didn't have a definition for motel, so with this revision, we would, and then the actual Wakazoo unit, instead of being considered a short-term rental, would actually be considered, in this case, a boutique hotel, because each of the 4 units have an exterior, a boutique motel, because each of the units have an exterior door. And then the consequence of that is that those 4 short-term rental licenses would then be available in the pool based on your recommendation to cap them at 40. So that's how it all played out. And that's what's in this ordinance, which is the zoning ordinance portion of the short-term rental. The city council, you'll be getting in their packet on Monday, the ordinance that refers to the license, which you all had an opportunity to review and comment on at the last meeting. So that's in a nutshell.
Okay, questions for the plan?
So I had a question on, I'm thinking of other buildings in the CBD. And I'm looking at the definition of motel. And initially I said to myself, well, it's not too likely that there'd be all these motels because you'd have to have separate entrances for all the units. And obviously most of these older buildings, you wouldn't have a separate entrance, you'd be inside.
Correct.
Then I thought to myself, this definition of a motel, a building, a group of buildings in which lodging is provided to transient guests offered for public compensation, access from each room is through an exterior door. So what if I had a building downtown and I said, you know, my first floor residential is not allowed, but I'm going to call that a motel. And the rest of the building is whatever it is. So like apartments, but I'm going to call it first floor motel. It's a building, lodgings provided to transient guests. It didn't say the whole building has to be. Would it be part of a building, and is that a problem?
I think our interpretation would be if they said, well, my first floor unit is a motel, my upper stories are apartments, we'd say, well, the building is not a motel.
Just want to make sure you're happy that this definition doesn't get us in trouble with that.
Well, it was reviewed, and I'm not, I think the 3 of us all put our heads together and tried to look at different options. And we came to conclusion that the motel definition really fit what we were trying to get at, but I appreciate what your observation.
Would there be any more words you could put in to say, basically, the concept is that the entire building?
I was just gonna say, we could say a motel, a building or group of buildings where the entire building is used for lodging. I wonder about if that would be better. That would be, that's fine. We can insert that into the ordinance.
Is this going to create a loophole? I'm thinking not so much in the central business district, but in other commercial areas, any freestanding building, couldn't I just break up any commercial building, put exterior entrances in there and call it a motel?
Well, if it was, yeah, I mean, if, for example, if it was allowed by right or special land use and somebody wanted to take a commercial building and adaptively reuse it into a motel, you could do that. As long as it was in a commercial. As long as in a commercial area.
So motels are not allowed in residential districts, yeah.
In fact, that they're not allowed they're only allowed in a couple of your business districts too. They're not allowed in every business.
So is there a special licensure requirement for motel?
It would be motel, hotel. It'd be the same licensing.
So they not only have to meet the requirement of the short-term rental regulations that are being established, licensing record, but that also have to meet the hotel motel licensing requirements?
If they're a motel, they don't have to get a short-term rental license.
So you mentioned that they go into the pool. in this case, if they license themselves as a motel, they wouldn't be in the short-term rental. That's correct.
So you'd have four
Extra.
that,
Extra, yeah, I misunderstood. I thought you were saying they would go into the pool. Okay, understood. Thank you.
We can change the definition to regards that motel, the entire building has to be used as a motel. We can make that modification before it goes to city council.
What are the requirements to be a motel?
Basically, a motel would be that it provides, it's a building, a group of buildings, you know, entire building, which is offered to transient guests for compensation that has basically access to exterior doors.
I guess in my mind, I'm thinking this section of the community between the downtown and the hospital. And I forget exactly the zoning district there. And why couldn't any of those buildings be called a motel? And doesn't that kind of create a fairly significant loophole to this ideal of trying to license short-term rentals to not take away from, you know, if it's workforce housing or other commercial activities?
That's a good question. A short-term rental shouldn't be looked at as a motel. A motel is a business, you know, that is much like a hotel, but a hotel is, you know, you have your lobby and internal access off of a hallway. Well, for example, the person that owns the old Flapjack restaurant or the old, you know, the Nagoya restaurant that's closed and released, he had approached us about turning that into a short-term rental, and we suggested to him that maybe he look at that as instead of a short-term rental, as a motel. Because it's in the district where it's special land use.
It's a special condition.
Special conditional use as an adaptive reuse for that building, because he's having a hard time leasing. But you have other motels along that area too, to the north of the hospital or south of the hospital.
The building across the streets, for example, from City Hall, I think is currently on the market with several units.
Yeah.
Like, it seems to me that this really kind of allows anyone to do short-term rentals in a commercial area, as long as there's an exterior access to a unit.
Currently, under your ordinance, that's already allowed. The problem was that there was no definition for motel, even though the ordinance allows motels in those districts.
Right, we're not expanding where motels are allowed.
We're just defining.
Yeah.
But also outside of the CBD, there's parking requirements that go along in the other commercial districts. So that would eliminate a lot of the ones between here and the hospital turning into motels, I would imagine.
Right.
But
And the house here on the corner up here that you're referring to is actually office service district, so it's not even one that would be allowed.
But I do have a concern about the group of buildings, because somebody that owns buildings, say in the Mitchell CBD area could own multiple buildings in a row, and he could turn all of those first floor into motels. And I don't think we'd want to see that in our sort of shopping district on our main street. So
Well, I think that definition changed at the entire building.
But I think it should be one building, but not, you can't group multiple buildings together to create this.
Well, we're all thinking about CBD, think outside the CBD. A typical motel sometimes would have a manager's office, which was external, and they may have two buildings on the property that were broken up into motel rooms.
I think we should focus on the CBD when we're using those words together.
Technically, right now, they could do that, because motels are allowed in the central business district on the first floor. So technically, if someone does own multiple businesses, they could potentially do that now anyway. It's not, I mean, the group doesn't change anything in that sense. It would be the exterior entrances where they wouldn't have entrances to individual rooms in the CBD. Most likely that would become a motel, which is
A hotel.
Hotel.
Yeah.
or hotel, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Which in some communities like Holland, for example, in downtown Holland, they have I think they call it the Flats, which is a boutique hotel, which is very, very successful. And so, yeah, but your ordinance allows that already. It's just, we didn't have a definition.
So the CBD will now allow motels and hotels.
Does not.
not motels, just. hotels.
Yes, it does.
We
No,
don't have a
it-
definition.
It's going to allow hotels, I mean motels.
You just didn't have a definition.
It already was, but we didn't have the definition. If somebody came and said, what is a motel? We didn't have a you don't have a
If you're
definition.
a distinction between a hotel and a motel,
Exactly.
well, now there is.
Now there is a distinction.
Okay.
So just to clarify, is there, do we allow hotels in the central business district?
Yes.
We do, okay. No one has proposed it.
No one's proposed that.
Well, there's a boutique hotel that was proposed on Howard and Rose. I'm not sure, Howard and Bay. Howard and Bay. That didn't end up happening and maybe not happened yet. I don't know if there's still, if there's any chance that
Oh, okay.
that happened, but that had been potentially a place for a boutique hotel. All right, any other discussion? Ready for a motion?
So I do have a question. We had talked about doing if a property sells, there would be a 30-day grace period where the new owner could go in and apply for an existing STR license. And you were gonna,
Yeah, that was discussed with the city attorney and the licensing. And his advice was that we not do that because it just opens up areas of interpretation in terms of when does the city get notified on the 30 days. And he said the way that the ordinance is currently set up where it does not transfer is probably the cleanest way to do it.
okay,
And, I'm just paraphrasing what Matt had to say.
And then a motel, if somebody wanted to sell that as a business, they would be able to do that. Yeah. Yep. Any public comment?
Christopher Carey, I'm the owner of Little Bay Cottage on 414 Walker. I just want to say I appreciate the commission really talking about this. We are a motel. We in 2 years, we've had over 750 bookings. We're not a short-term rental, so to speak. We really have a significant turnover, but the thing that we always find is the thing that people love about our building is that it's right there in the central business district. And I cannot tell you how much people love the city of Petoskey, love being able to walk to places, love being able to go to restaurants, love being able to participate in the community. And we appreciate John and Lisa and all of you taking into consideration our unique situation.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So,
We need a motion before the public hearing or after?
well, that, you know what? I didn't read the right thing. Thank you for reminding me. What do I do with it? All right, I'm officially opening the floor for the public hearing. So you don't need to repeat it, but we'll just acknowledge that was for the public hearing.
Christopher Carey on Wackazoo, that was for the public hearing. Thank you very much.
Okay. And there's no one online. So I now close the public hearing. And bring it back to the commissioners.
Could I ask, John, what the wording was you suggested, then how would it actually be worded?
Commissioner Paul, I'd like to get with Matt and go over the definition of Matt before it gets on the council agenda.
I wrote kind of what he said, where the entire building is used as a motel. That be added. All right, ready for a motion? We need a motion.
Move this to city council. I
Yeah.
move that the short-term rental ordinance that's been developed be sent to city council.
Second.
Okay, Rick made the motion, Ted made second. Discussion. Any more discussion? All right, roll call vote.
Robson,
Yes.
Wilmot,
Yes.
Buck,
Yes.
Detmer,
yes,
McSweeney,
Yes.
Meridian,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
All right, on to public comment. For anything that was not on the agenda. All right, moving on. Commissioner comments. Anybody have anything?
I just have some questions that I believe will be addressed during the updates
Okay.
on the status of various things that we've acted on in the past. So perhaps we should wait for the updates first.
Okay. Anybody else? Rick?
I'm not well versed in Robert's rules of order, or maybe this doesn't fall under that, but I've always wondered why we put new business ahead of old business.
Mhm.
I've always thought, well, old business should go first so that anybody who's here from the last month's meeting, because it was new business then, and now it's old, they could be dealt with first so they could leave and not have to sit through new business. Is there a reason why we do new business before old business?
I don't think so.
Ordinance die hard.
And, you know, if you're looking at agenda changes, it's typical that a public hearing is the first thing on the agenda. So the people that are here for the public hearing don't have to sit through the entire meeting. So Lisa and I can get together with the chairman and reorganize the agenda. I don't think there's anything that's in writing that lays this format.
Okay,
I think Robert's rules would generally say old business should precede new business, but certainly the public hearings would be first. I would agree.
Yeah.
And the idea is sometimes you don't get to things, and if you don't get to something, it's maybe something you haven't talked about, but you talk about the things you were trying to finish up,
right.
is the
Yeah, that
idea.
only makes sense.
Okay. All right, updates?
We have a rental inspection committee meeting scheduled for June 29th at 1:30. The folks that are on the committee received a binder that had example ordinances in it. And that'll be the purpose of discussion, will be to kind of hone in on a couple ones that everybody thinks has some relevance to the city, so we can start getting in detail on how that ordinance should be constructed. I do have binders made up for the zoning committee, but I'll get those out after the beginning of the month, because we're really not going to kick off the zoning until the city applies to MEDC after the start of the state fiscal year, which would be October 1st for funding. So that committee won't really be convening for another couple months yet. But we do have a meeting on the 29th with the rental inspection.
Okay, anything else?
I think Lisa and I are just getting our feet wet on both of our responsibilities, so it's a learning curve for both of us.
For all of us?
I'd say you're both doing an excellent job.
Yes.
Thank you.
So to follow up on those status questions that I had, as an official alternate for the two standing committees, I'd rather not receive a package 24 hours in advance when somebody says they've canceled. So I don't know whether it's appropriate for me to get a package at the same time that the committee members get or not. As a
I may have made a mistake, Charlie. I had you as an alternate on the zoning committee.
Either one's
And
fine.
I have a binder for you.
Okay, fine. Thank you. The housing quality assessment, you're waiting until October to do that? Or-
No, we're in the process now of developing the methodology internally to start working on it.
Okay. So more to come. Good. With regard to the cap recommendation that we made on the short-term rentals to council, is that advanced to council?
Monday, they have it.
Okay. And with regard to a code enforcement officer, could you give us a status update on that, please?
Yes, so we do have a code enforcement officer. He started in May, late May. He has been very busy. He's been addressing issues and things appear to be being taken care of rather quickly. So he's having a great response to his contact with the public and addressing matters that are of concern.
I think it would be great periodically for us to get some kind of a report from the code enforcement officer, because it might help shape our opinion as to future changes that would be appropriate.
Okay.
What's the code enforcement officer's name?
Tony Belamonte.
Those were all my status questions.
Does anyone have any questions about the actions taken by the Office of City Planner for 2023 months, January through May? Okay. Well. Any other business before us? Anyone? I adjourned this meeting at
7:40.
7:40.
5 minutes to spare.
Yeah.